recording, webinar 3, learning outcome 3, and it's generally only about competitive advantage. I've added a little graphic here which implies that competitive advantage is about winning, about being in front, about doing things better than other people. So it's something I think most people understand. The actual unit content is sources of competitive advantage, pricing arrangements, cost reduction activities for competitive advantage, and how collaboration can help us achieve competitive advantage. So there's 3 things that fit fairly well, I think: sources, cost reduction and collaboration. The pricing one is a little unusual, that it doesn't really achieve competitive advantage unless you can get lower cost or better performance, but it's in there. This slide shows in red the areas never examined previously in the case study. Pricing arrangements will probably prove difficult to work into a case study, but value analysis and engineering are probably likely areas that could be covered before the unit content changes next year. The previous exam questions are all shown here, and you can see quite a lot of repeat of competitive advantage questions. 3.1 then covers evaluate the main sources of competitive advantage. Specifically, it's competitive advantage based on lowest cost, or competitive advantage through what is called differential advantage. This can be innovation, range of products, brand image, and customer care. So these are the key themes of 3.1, the sources of competitive advantage. What we must ask ourselves is, of course, what is competitive advantage? And a good definition from Barney is given here, and it means superior performance relative to other competitors in the same industry, or superior performance relative to the industry average. What it normally means is a company will be making more profit, it will be more successful. The theory then of competitive advantage was developed by Michael Porter, and Porter came up with his generic strategies to achieve competitive advantage. Now, basically, Porter said there are just 2 sources of competitive advantage, either lower cost or differentiation. There is also a difference in the scope of your competitive offering, whether it can be broad or narrow. So this gives us 4 strategies: cost leadership, cost focus, which are both low cost competitive advantage, and the cost focus means you're selling to a narrow segment of the market. The other strategies were differentiation and differential focus. Porter basically said to be successful and have competitive advantage, you need to select one of these generic strategies and implement your value chain to deliver it. What you mustn't do is get stuck in the middle and be neither cost leader or differentiated. You need to have a firm position in one of these quadrants. So very, very important theory. There are 2 videos here which I strongly recommend you watch. So the generic strategies are strategies you adapt to achieve competitive advantage. So very, very important. Just go to there, and I will double check this have we finished. No, it wasn't going around well spotted. Sorry about that, but I can add to it. I've worked out how to do that, so I can add the sound to that. So we said innovation.
Okay, so you can add the ones that we've done.
Yes, I can.
That's not recorded, you can add it to it.
Yeah, I've worked a way of doing that. You can go straight to the slide and add to it, so I'll add to those. So we talked about innovation, and we've talked about customer care as a sort of CA. We said competencies enable you to be good at something and can help you be successful. And then we're talking about this strange concept here called sustainable competitive advantage. And that's all it means. Is it sustainable? Well, for it to be sustainable, it must be valuable, rare, hard to imitate, and you've got to be well organised to take advantage of it. The alternative framework, which I think is in the study guide, is VRIN, which is valuable, rare, imitable, and non-substitutionable. So there's a very difficult concept in the book that links to competitive advantage. We don't really need it, but it's useful if you're talking about how successful a company is, to link to whether it's sustainable. So if people can't copy it, can't imitate it, then you should keep being successful. But if people can copy what you're doing, then they may reduce your profits and overtake you. So that VRIN framework, it is in the notes. I won't drop out the slide, but under the notes in my study guide I have put details about that. It's probably more of a level 6 concept, to be honest, than level 5. So that's new products, innovation, delivery, quality, value for money, advice, early supplier involvement, a little kitchen sink. Obviously suppliers can contribute immensely to competitive advantage. 3.2 is about pricing arrangements that can be agreed to achieve competitive advantage. It is an area of the unit content that has never previously been examined, and it would prove fairly difficult to set a case scenario where a question could be asked. Getting the correct pricing arrangement can lead to improved supply chain performance, but it's very arguable whether it would lead to competitive advantage. This particular section then covers fixed pricing, variable pricing where you can adjust the price, and the worst case scenario, cost plus. It considers the use of open book costing and obviously cost transparency. It further goes on to look at the use of incentivisation and the risk and reward mechanisms that can be applied, particularly in construction projects as opposed to ongoing production materials or ongoing MRO items. So we'll move on to pricing arrangements. To manage prices, we might conduct price analysis to determine if the price is fair. So that can be quotations. We could use cost analysis, where the supplier justifies their price by the need to cover costs. So the costs would have to breakdown would be required. And price leverage can be secured to reduce prices and manage prices by aggregating demand, negotiating harder, or using competitive sourcing methods such as e-auctions. So these are all methods of managing prices. Cost analysis as part of price management. If buyers can ascertain the supplier's cost structure, the information can be very useful because it can help keep prices realistic and helps you negotiate reduced prices. It focuses attention on what costs ought to be and probably identifies the minimum price the supplier can afford to charge for it to be sustainable. And it enables the buyer to estimate how valuable the business or contract will be to the supplier. Open book costing is a popular technique, and supporters argue that increased cost visibility supports supply development by giving the buyer a better understanding of the supplier's operations. It enables them to collaborate to reduce costs, and it helps develop trust. The key to this is identifying the cost drivers and working together to eliminate waste in the supply chain. So a very useful technique. Pricing can be fixed, as in it doesn't change. It can be variable, where you've got contract price adjustment mechanisms. You can use incentivised pricing, where there can be agreed gain pain, which we'll cover shortly, or the worst case scenario, full cost plus, where you allow them all costs plus an agreed percentage. And obviously there is no incentive for the supplier to reduce their costs in this scenario. Pricing arrangements showing risk. Financial risk is practically nil if you go for a firm price, but financial risk to the buyer is very high if you go for cost price plus a fixed percentage, and then there are the various options in between, from fixed price through to target cost. Variable pricing. Suppliers' costs in performing the contract may fluctuate because of many reasons: inflation, exchange rate changes, changes in scope, unforeseen events, many reasons that cause prices to change. There are various forms of cost plus, and remember, you will have your textbook and notes with you in an exam, and you will have analysed the case well before. So there are 4 versions of cost plus. Target costing is quite common in the automotive industry, where suppliers may be given a price to aim for, and there is the cost plus approach. How might we incentivise suppliers? Well, it isn't just about reducing costs. It can be stage payments on completion of activities, bonuses for improved performance, quicker delivery, and various cost plus award fee, cost plus incentive fee options. There's a detailed example here of how a gainshare model might work, and remember, this is often called gain pain. If the costs are kept down, both the supplier and the purchaser gain, but if costs increase above the estimated production cost, then both the buyer and the supplier share in the pain. This example shows what happens if the supplier manages to keep their cost down to 600, which is 200 less than the original estimate of 800. The 200 savings are shared equally between the buyer and the seller, so the buyer would gain an additional the supplier would gain an additional £100. The opposite is true though. If the cost went 200 above the 800, there would be extra costs for the buyer and a reduced payment of £100 to the supplier. There are various advantages and disadvantages of gain sharing, which are generally straightforward. There is potential for a CIPS case study to make a suggestion of how they might use gain sharing and the advantages, disadvantages, in which case these would need relating to the actual case study. .3 is about cost reduction activities to help achieve competitive advantage. So all the content are possible ways of reducing costs in the supply chain, which include rationalisation and aggregating requirements, single sourcing, negotiating reductions, collaborative and competitive models of supply, and the use of VA and VE. Supply chain cost reduction, there is a 5-stage process detailed, which is about understanding the drivers, hence why we need transparency, understand why excess costs exist, focus and prioritise these initiatives, develop strategies and tactics, review and measure, and that is a 5-step process. We might want to aggregate requirements through central procurement, perhaps using purchase cards for low value items, negotiating volume call-off contracts, standardisation and variety reduction, redesigning networks to consolidate orders, and we might outsource processes which enable to aggregate the requirements of multiple clients and pass on economies of scale. So quite a few areas where requirements can be aggregated to achieve cost reduction. There are advantages perhaps in reducing your supply base by supplier rationalisation, which include reducing market engagement, sourcing and transaction costs, less management costs, freeing up procurement time, you've got less suppliers, and leveraging improving supplier relationships and capabilities for continuous improvement and waste elimination and other cost reduction programs. How do we do it? Well, we need to analyse and segment the supply base. We need to establish evaluation criteria. We then need to evaluate suppliers, and we need to pick the few best and eliminate the others through supplier selection, and then we need to implement it. So it's supplier rationalisation, 5 steps there, 5 stages. Multi-sourcing might mean we've got too many suppliers and can lead to high costs. It's difficult to exploit value added and potential of concentrating on collaborative relationships with less suppliers, and it can lead to waste by retaining suppliers who cannot meet the firm's requirement or are otherwise not often used, so it might increase stock variety and proliferation. The risk though of consolidating single source fairly obvious. Over-reliance on a single supplier, supply chain vulnerability from natural disasters or other effects, flooding, earthquake, etc. Loss of competitive position in the market, and I think very important is loss of market knowledge because of the close relationship. How do you keep aware of what the market prices and developments are? Supplier complacency, because they've got the contract, they know it's a long-term arrangement, they may not innovate, and there's risk due to failure, production costs, etc. Some fairly obvious limitations. The collaborative approach, which is tiering, reducing suppliers and working with only a few suppliers, gives you more cost reduction opportunities. It's about seeking end-to-end supply chain cost reductions and increasing the competitiveness not just of your company but the whole supply chain. There are many techniques: target costing, open book costing and cost transparency, and they need close cooperation and trust, which is only possible with a collaborative arrangement. And the approaches include lean, outsourcing, ESI, simultaneous engineering, etc., etc. So many techniques. Particularly in the public sector, consortium procurement is used. The health sector, the education sector, schools and universities all have consortium procurements where they will come together, set a consortia up which will negotiate and set contracts up on their behalf and get bulk discounts and better deals. So there are very similar advantages and disadvantages to a centralised procurement, but consortium procurement is different, and it is particularly in use in the public sector. The most important and perhaps the oldest technique for procurement is the use of VA and VE, and value engineering is at the design stage, trying to design out unnecessary costs and activities, eliminate wasteful parts, and value analysis is the name given to the process of cost reduction after the product has been introduced. So it's rather reactive than proactive. Finally, on this section, GECU developed or attributed to have developed a value analysis as a technique. There are 5 tests. Does the part contribute value? Is the cost proportionate to its usefulness? Are all the features needed? Can a low cost method be used by retaining the features and functions that add value? And finally, is anyone paying less for this part? So 5 tests of value. Very simple. Strategic. So we've got 5 items which are strategic. We really could do to form partnerships here. Let's what our suppliers think about as well. If they think you're exploitable and nuisance, you don't start to partner with them. You would resource it. Yeah.
How will the supplier know what? How will the buyer know what a supplier think about his organization? Because
the truth is,
the item could be critical to you.
Yeah.
I think the strategic box.
Yeah.
And you are a nuisance to the supplier.
Yeah, I think the only thing I used to do in practice when I was in industry, if we weren't in their top 10, I didn't deal with them. if we weren't sufficient spend to be, say, top 5 even, then you aren't good.
How do you know if you are there in top 10?
Well, you'd ask them, you'd say, well, your turnover is, which you can find out if their turnover's £50 million and you've a 5 million value business per year, you would know that's a 10, but you would ask them, who are your top 4 accounts, how much are they? And that's usually a question in supplier assessment. So I think you'd need to ask. It's not easy, but I think that's a very crude, simple way. And they might say, well, we're moving into this area, it's important to our business, so it could be that they're trying to diversify as well. So there could be many other reasons why you could be core or development. But I think looking at their turnover, or just asking them, who are your top 4 suppliers, and what, and roughly they'll tell you what is their turnover. But it's a theoretical model, isn't it? It's in practice, you can't draw it and plot it, can you? So I can be very cynical about these. Right, okay, so we might need to partner. We need top level commitment, openness, clear objectives. Put rather too many slides in here. This is from one of the old partnership modules. We need to have high enough spend. If there's high risk, we might need to form partnerships if it's technically complex, fast changing markets. All reasons why we might. How do we manage the shift? Monitor, communication. Make sure there's operational fit and looking at the trade-offs. So very difficult to get to work. Make them work. How do we incentivise them? Well, this slide should be with the pricing ones looking at this. This looks like, sorry, that's been moved out into the wrong place. And then, how do we develop trust? Model behaviours, commitments, proactive, disclose information, measure, be empathetic. Not keen on the model, but it's a model and the 6 stages of how you might expect trust to be developed, and you could probably link that to a case study if needed. How do we create partnership sources? So there's a 6-step process there. It goes on a bit. Selecting partners, how do we select them? There's a million questions there, you'll never remember all them, but again, you're going to have this with you in the exam. Are they committed to us? What does the company bring? Do we basically, do you like them? Can we get of them? Can we do business with them? Factors that limit relationships, lack of support, conflict, trust, lack of skills, any reason you can ship agreement. It's a bit like a scope of work. It's got statements, cost, service. So it's like a specification. How do you implement it? Sell the idea, choose your partners, refine. So I think there's 2 models there. And then problems of termination. So in your case study, there could be a supplier who they've partnered with and they're having problems terminating the relationship. I don't like it. It's the wrong model, really. That
we use this for new product development.
It is. It's like the new product, isn't it? And it's not. But basically, you introduce your new suppliers, you develop a relationship, it matures, and there's an end. So relationships have a life cycle. How do we use it? Where in the life cycle is it? Where should it be? Are there any risks?